In a quiet but powerful moment, former First Lady Esther Lungu has finally spoken, revealing that former President Edgar Lungu didn't just pass away in South Africa. He fled there out of fear. What was he afraid of? Why did he choose to die in exile? And what does this say about Zambia today? He was once Zambia's commander-in-chief, the face of a ruling party, and a symbol of stability for millions. But when Edgar Chagwa Lungu died, it wasn't in Lusaka. It wasn't surrounded by Zambian state honors. He died in South Africa, far from home. Now, his widow, Esther Lungu, has broken her silence, and her words have left the nation stunned. He didn't just go for treatment. He left because he was scared of what they were going to do to him. In this report, we unpack the truth behind Lungu's exile, Esther's emotional statement, and the politics that followed him to the grave. The phrase "he died in exile," Esther speaks, likely refers to the death of Edgar Lungu, Zambia's 6th president, 2015 to 2021, who passed away on June 5, 2025, in Pretoria, South Africa, at age 68, and subsequent statements made by his widow, Esther Lungu. Lungu died at Mediclinic Medforum after receiving treatment for an undisclosed illness, later revealed as throat cancer with cardiac complications from surgery. The term exile stems from Esther Lungu's claim that her husband left Zambia fearing persecution by the government of President Hakainde Hichilema, suggesting he did not intend to return. Esther Lungu's statements emerged in legal submissions to a South African court, where she argued that Lungu faced mistreatment, including restrictions on his freedom, public vilification, and denial of medical care, which she claimed amounted to human rights abuses. She stated that Lungu, aware of these pressures, left Zambia without official clearance and expressed a desire for Hichilema not to be involved in his funeral. This led to a bitter dispute between the Lungu family and the Zambian government over funeral arrangements, with the family initially opting for a private burial in South Africa to honor Lungu's wishes. The exile narrative is contentious. While Esther Lungu framed Lungu's departure as fleeing persecution, the Zambian government denies claims of a travel ban or deliberate mistreatment, asserting that Lungu was free to seek medical care. The dispute escalated when a South African court halted a planned burial in Johannesburg on June 25, 2025, following the Zambian government's legal action to repatriate Lungu's body for a state funeral. Esther's statements highlight a deep political feud between Lungu and Hichilema, which continued posthumously, shaping public and legal discourse around his death. Why did Edgar Lungu leave Zambia? To the public, it seemed like another routine medical trip. Edgar Lungu had traveled abroad before for health concerns, but this time, he didn't come back. Sources close to the former president confirmed he quietly left Zambia weeks before his health took a critical turn. There was no state escort, no public farewell, just silence, and then news of his death. Behind the scenes, close allies now say the former president feared something much deeper than illness. He feared arrest, humiliation, and political erasure. Edgar Lungu left Zambia in early 2025 to seek specialized medical treatment in South Africa for throat cancer, a condition linked to his history of achalasia, which had previously required treatment abroad. However, Esther Lungu's statements in July 2025 revealed a deeper motivation. Lungu feared persecution by the Zambian government under President Hakainde Hichilema. She claimed Lungu departed without official clearance, believing he could not safely return due to alleged mistreatment, including the stripping of his state benefits, restrictions on his movements, and public vilification. Lungu's fears were rooted in a long-standing rivalry with Hichilema, who defeated him in the 2021 election. During Lungu's presidency, Hichilema was imprisoned for over 100 days on treason charges in 2017 after a motorcade incident, fueling animosity. After losing power, Lungu faced challenges, including the loss of retirement benefits when he re-entered politics in 2023, as Zambian law withdraws such privileges for former presidents who resume political activity. Lungu also alleged police harassment, describing himself as virtually under house arrest in 2024, with restrictions on public jogging and travel for medical treatment or conferences. The government, however, denied imposing a travel ban or restricting medical access, with Information Minister Cornelius Muitwa calling such claims a fiction. Critics of Esther's narrative argue that Lungu, as a former president, had access to Zambia's healthcare system, which his administration had invested in, questioning why he sought treatment abroad. The combination of medical necessity and political tension likely drove Lungu's departure, with Esther's statements emphasizing the latter to frame his exit as a flight from persecution, a claim that remains debated due to conflicting accounts. Esther Lungu's statement. When Esther Lungu finally spoke to the press from Johannesburg, her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "He said to me, if I stay, they will destroy everything I built, and me with it." She recounted days of anxiety, isolation, and watching her husband battle more than just illness. He wanted to be remembered as a leader, not as a convict dragged through courts. In her view, Edgar Lungu was not just a former head of state. He was a man hunted by the very system he once led. Esther Lungu's full statement, as reported in July 2025, was made in submissions to a South African court addressing the Zambian government's attempt to repatriate Edgar Lungu's remains for a state funeral. While the exact verbatim statement is not fully reproduced in available sources, key excerpts from the Zambian Observer summarize her claims. She revealed that Edgar Lungu left Zambia fearing persecution by the Hichilema administration, stating he departed without official clearance and knew he might not return. She accused the government of mistreating Lungu and his family, citing Esther Lungu's full statement, as reported in July 2025, was made in submissions to a South African court addressing the Zambian government's attempt to repatriate Edgar Lungu's remains for a state funeral. While the exact verbatim statement is not fully reproduced in available sources, key excerpts from the Zambian Observer summarize her claims. She revealed that Edgar Lungu left Zambia fearing persecution by the Hichilema administration, stating he departed without official clearance and knew he might not return. She accused the government of mistreating Lungu and his family, citing human rights abuses. She alleged public vilification, restrictions on Lungu's freedom of movement and assembly, and denial of medical care, which she claimed contributed to his death. Funeral wishes. Esther stated that Lungu explicitly instructed that President Hichilema should not attend his funeral, reflecting their bitter rivalry. Reluctance to return. She noted that Lungu, sedated and on a ventilator 2 days before his death, expressed unwillingness to return to Zambia or have a state funeral presided over by Hichilema. Esther also argued that South African law grants the next of kin the right to decide burial arrangements, opposing the Zambian government's push for repatriation. She expressed that she and her children found it undesirable to reside in Zambia permanently due to ongoing mistreatment. The statement sparked controversy, with some Zambians criticizing Esther, arguing that Lungu's administration had built hospitals that he could have used, questioning the need for foreign treatment. Others supported her, citing human rights concerns and referencing international standards like the Geneva Convention to argue that denying medical access was a serious violation. The statement intensified the funeral dispute, delaying Lungu's burial and highlighting the politicization of his death. What was he afraid of? Under President Hakainde Hichilema's administration, the government launched multiple anti-corruption investigations targeting the Lungu era. Former ministers were arrested, assets seized, and Lungu himself was being scrutinized under new investigative frameworks. Esther Lungu claims these actions were not about justice, but revenge. They used the law like a weapon, and he knew his turn was coming. While the government denies any political targeting, critics argue that the timing and focus of these investigations painted a clear picture. Edgar Lungu's fears, as articulated by Esther Lungu, centered on perceived persecution by the Hichilema administration. Specifically, he was afraid of political retribution. Lungu believed the government targeted him for his political activities after losing the 2021 election. His return to politics in 2023 led to the withdrawal of his retirement benefits, which he saw as punitive. He also faced police restrictions, including warnings against public jogging deemed political activism and alleged house arrest-like conditions in 2024, personal and family harassment. Esther claimed the government vilified Lungu publicly and targeted his family with corruption charges. She and her children, including MP Tasila Lungu, faced legal scrutiny over alleged stolen assets, which they denied. Lungu felt these actions were politically motivated to weaken his influence. Restricted access to medical care. Lungu alleged in 2024 that he was barred from traveling abroad for medical treatment, a claim Esther echoed, suggesting this restriction endangered his life. His history of achalasia and later throat cancer required specialized care unavailable in Zambia, heightening his fears of being trapped without adequate treatment. Loss of dignity. Lungu's instructions that Hichilema not attend his funeral reflect a fear that his legacy and final rights would be politicized by his rival. He sought to maintain control over his posthumous narrative. The government disputed these claims, with Minister Mwitwa denying any travel ban or medical restrictions, asserting Lungu's freedoms were intact. Critics on X questioned why Lungu didn't use Zambia's hospitals, built under his tenure, suggesting his fears might have been exaggerated for political leverage. Nonetheless, Lungu's documented complaints to the BBC in 2024 about police harassment and restricted movement lend credence to his sense of vulnerability, shaped by a bitter political rivalry and personal health challenges. Was the government aware? The government remained silent during Lungu's departure. No official farewell. No medical transparency. No national update. Did they know he wouldn't return? Reports from State House insiders suggest President HH was informed of Lungu's departure after he had landed in South Africa. Some sources claim efforts were made to bring him back, but the former president refused, citing lack of safety. It was not exile in legal terms, but it was in reality, a senior PF member told InspirAfrica. The Zambian government's role in Edgar Lungu's departure is a point of contention, with Esther Lungu alleging deliberate persecution and the government denying any wrongdoing. According to Esther, the Hichilema administration created a hostile environment that forced Lungu to leave Zambia in early 2025 for medical treatment in South Africa without official clearance. She cited withdrawal of benefits. After Lungu re-entered politics in 2023, the government stripped him of retirement benefits, as Zambian law mandates for former presidents resuming political activity. Esther framed this as retaliatory, reducing Lungu to a private citizen. dw.combc.com. Movement restrictions. Lungu claimed in 2024 that he was virtually under house arrest, with police restricting his public appearances and travel, including for medical purposes. Esther argued these restrictions prevented timely access to health care, contributing to his death. Anti-corruption campaign. The government's investigations into Lungu's family, including Esther and Tasila, for alleged corruption were perceived as targeted harassment. These legal actions heightened heightened Lungu's sense of vulnerability, theguardian.combc.com. Funeral dispute. Posthumously, the government's insistence on a state funeral, despite Lungu's wish for Hichilema's non-involvement, was seen by the family as disregarding his rights. The government's legal action in a South African court to block a private burial further fueled accusations of overreach. The government, however, maintained that Lungu was free to travel and seek medical care, with no formal travel ban imposed. Minister Mwitwa dismissed claims of persecution as politically motivated exaggerations. The government argued that, as a former president, Lungu's body belonged to Zambia and warranted a state funeral, citing national interest and precedent with other presidents buried at Embassy Memorial Park. Critics on X questioned why Lungu sought foreign treatment, suggesting domestic facilities were adequate. The government's actions, while legally grounded, were perceived by Lungu's supporters as exacerbating his departure, though evidence of direct causation remains inconclusive. Zambia reacts. News of Esther's statement spread like wildfire. Supporters of the Patriotic Front (PF) flooded social media with messages of sorrow and anger. He died in fear. Is this the Zambia he built? In contrast, some UPND supporters argued that Esther's statement was an attempt to rewrite history. Where was her voice when corruption was rampant? Now she wants sympathy. The public remains split. But there is one common thread. No Zambian, regardless of party, expected their former president to die in silence. In exile, Zambians' reactions to Edgar Lungu's death and the surrounding controversy were mixed, reflecting the polarized political landscape. His death on June 5, 2025, shocked the nation, given his continued influence despite being barred from the 2026 election. The funeral dispute and Esther Lungu's claims of persecution further divided public sentiment. Grief and support. Many Zambians, particularly Patriotic Front (PF) supporters, expressed genuine sorrow, with radio stations playing gospel music during the mourning period, reflecting Zambia's Christian culture. Lungu's accessibility to ordinary citizens and his infrastructure projects like road building were praised. Social media posts, including from PF leaders like Given Labinda, conveyed devastation and admiration for his legacy. Confusion and frustration. The standoff between Lungu's family, the PF, and the government over funeral arrangements caused chaos and sadness. The government declared a state mourning period from June 8 to June 23, but the PF announced a competing mourning period, and disputes over venues, Government Lodge versus PF headquarters, left mourners unsure how to pay respects. Constitutional lawyer John Sangwa noted the need for clearer laws on presidential funerals. Criticism and skepticism. Some Zambians, especially Hichilema supporters, criticized the Lungu family's decision to bury him in South Africa, viewing it as denying citizens closure. Posts on X questioned Esther's persecution claims, arguing that Lungu's administration built hospitals he could have used, and accused the family of hypocrisy given corruption allegations. Others felt Hichilema's delayed response to Lungu's death was disrespectful. Calls for unity. President Hichilema urged peace and unity, but his message was seen as hollow by Lungu supporters, who felt his government politicized the death. The prolonged dispute, culminating in a South African court halting the burial, deepened public frustration over the lack of reconciliation. Overall, reactions ranged from grief to anger, with Zambians divided along political lines, yearning for closure but caught in a feud that exposed unresolved tensions. What does the Constitution say? Zambia's constitution provides for state protection and privileges for former presidents, including medical care and immunity. But that immunity is conditional. Once evidence is presented, a former president can be stripped of protections and prosecuted. Lungu's critics say he ran from the law. Esther says he ran from political humiliation. He didn't fear justice. He feared injustice, she said. Now, legal scholars are asking, should there be more clarity or compassion in how Zambia handles transitions of power? The Zambian constitution does not explicitly address political asylum, either for citizens seeking it abroad or for the state granting it to foreigners. However, related provisions and international obligations provide context for understanding Zambia's stance on asylum in relation to Edgar Lungu's case. No direct asylum provisions. The Constitution of Zambia, amended 2016, focuses on citizenship, rights, and governance, but lacks specific clauses on political asylum. Article 8 outlines citizenship rights, including protection from arbitrary deprivation, but does not cover asylum processes. Zambia's refugee policy is governed by the Refugees Control Act of 1970 and international agreements like the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, to which Zambia is a signatory. These frameworks prioritize refugees fleeing persecution, but do not explicitly address former heads of state. Wikipedia.org. Human rights protections. Articles 11 to 26 of the Constitution guarantee fundamental rights, including freedom of movement, assembly, and access to healthcare, which Esther Lungu claimed were violated in her husband's case. If Lungu sought asylum abroad, these rights could be invoked to argue persecution, though no evidence confirms he formally applied for asylum in South Africa. ZambianObserver.com. International obligations. Zambia's adherence to the Refugee Convention and the African Union's 1969 Convention on Refugees obliges it to consider asylum claims based on well-founded fears of persecution. However, South African law, where Lungu died, grants next of kin authority over burial decisions, complicating complicating Zambia's claim to repatriate his body. ZambianObserver.com. Presidential status. The Constitution does not address the asylum rights of former presidents, but Article 35 outlines their benefits, which Lungu lost upon re-entering politics. Esther's claim that Lungu fled persecution suggests he might have considered asylum, but no legal record confirms this. BBC.com. ZambianObserver.com. Precedent and debate. The government's argument that Lungu's body belongs to Zambia reflects a cultural and legal expectation that former presidents be buried at designated sites like Embassy Memorial Park, as with Kenneth Kaunda. This implies limited autonomy for former leaders, potentially clashing with asylum principles. BBC.com. Without explicit constitutional guidance, Lungu's case highlights a legal gray area, with his family's claims of persecution raising questions about Zambia's human rights obligations versus state control over national figures. ZambianObserver.com. His legacy and what comes next. Edgar Lungu may have died outside Zambia, but his legacy lives within it. This documentary is based on publicly available sources, court filings, press briefings, and interviews given by key figures in Zambia and South Africa. It is presented purely for informational and educational purposes, with no political affiliation or agenda. To some, he's a man who protected the Constitution, oversaw peaceful transitions, and kept Zambia's economy afloat during global challenges. To others, he's a leader who allowed corruption to grow, silenced critics, and weakened institutions. But now, a more human truth has emerged. A leader who died not as a lion in his palace, but as a man in hiding. A man who feared his own country. He wanted peace, Esther said, but peace was no longer possible in Zambia. As the nation debates, argues, and grieves, one thing is clear. Edgar Lungu's legacy as Zambia's sixth president, 2015 to 2021, is complex and polarizing, shaped by his governance, controversies, and the posthumous funeral dispute. His death in South Africa and the ensuing feud have further defined how he is remembered. Achievements. Lungu is credited with significant infrastructure development, particularly road building, which boosted Zambia's connectivity. He appointed Zambia's first female vice president, Inange Waina, and commuted death sentences, promoting human dignity. Supporters, including analyst Lee Habasanda, praise his accessibility, noting he allowed the poorest of Zambians to get close to the corridors of power. Reuters.com. Reuters, Cumin.wikipedia.org. Controversies. Critics highlight economic mismanagement, with Zambia defaulting on its debt in 2020, high unemployment, and corruption scandals involving Lungu's allies and family. His administration faced accusations of suppressing freedoms, using emergency powers, shutting down critical media, and enacting laws like the Cybersecurity Act to curb dissent. His supporters' thuggery and failure to rein them in tarnished his image. BBC.com. DW.com. Reuters.com. Political influence. Despite losing the 2021 election and being barred from running in 2026, Lungu remained a dominant figure in the Patriotic Front and the United Kwacha Alliance, shaping opposition politics. His death and the funeral row, however, denied Zambians closure, potentially diminishing his unifying potential. NewYorkTimes.com and Wikipedia.org. BBC.com. Posthumous feud. The dispute over his burial, whether in South Africa or Zambia, has politicized his legacy. Esther's claims of persecution frame Lungu as a victim of political vendettas, resonating with PF supporters but alienating others who see the family's stance as divisive. The government's push for a state funeral underscores Lungu's national significance but risks overshadowing his personal wishes. OpenZambia.com. ZambianObserver.com. Future implications. Lungu's legacy will likely be debated along partisan lines. Supporters may view him as a martyr of political persecution, while critics emphasize governance failures. The unresolved burial issue, with a court hearing set for August 2025, ensures his death remains a flashpoint, potentially influencing the 2026 election. His commitment to One Zambia, One Nation, as echoed by his daughter Tassila, may endure as a call for unity, but only if political divides heal. BBC.com.